Not a sound, announced Janet. No squeak of sneakers, no jingle of backpack zippers. Yet, every predator in the room felt the temperature drop. Garry J. McLaughlin was signing a death warrant disguised as a lunch receipt when the 7-year-old girl stepped between him and the sunlight. Garry J. McLaughlin sat at his usual table beneath the warm glow of a single brass chandelier, the one spot that let him watch both the front entrance and the private booth in the back. Tailored black suit sharp enough to cut paper, white shirt open at the collar just enough to reveal the edge of ink that climbed his neck like black flames. A heavy watch glinted on his wrist as he signed a leather-bound ledger. His bodyguard took one step forward. Garry lifted a single finger without looking up. The man stopped as if the floor had turned to ice. The maitre d' appeared, mouth already forming polite panic, but Garry's eyes flicked him for half a second and the man melted backward into the shadows. Janet G. Sanders stopped exactly 3 feet from the table, close enough to be heard, far enough that she could still run if she had to. 7 years old. Yellow hoodie. Pink backpack with a faded unicorn patch. Her fingers strangled the straps so hard the plastic buckles creaked. She looked up at the most dangerous man in the city and her voice came out small and cracked. Can you walk me to school? I don't feel safe anymore. Garry set his pen down with the slow precision of someone defusing a bomb. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the silence. For the first time in years, something had walked into his world uninvited and unarmed, and unafraid to show fear. He studied her the way he studied men before he ended them, searching for angles, lies, leverage, and found only wide brown eyes, swimming with tears she refused to let fall. Why? One word. Flat, curious, dangerous. Janet's hands shook harder as she pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. When she unfolded it, the sleeve of her hoodie rode up, revealing a bracelet of fresh bruises around her thin wrist finger marks, adult-sized. She held the crayon drawing out like an offering. Big angry stick figures surrounding a tiny one with brown hair. A black car with evil eyes for headlights. Her school address was written in purple crayon in the corner. They push me every day, and the teachers say I'm lying. There's a man in a black car who watches me, and Mom called the police, but they said kids make things up. The restaurant had become a photograph nobody dared breathe. Garry took the drawing between 2 fingers, careful, as if it might explode. He smoothed it flat on the white tablecloth. Why me? He asked again, quieter this time. Janet wiped her nose on her sleeve, looked straight into eyes that had made grown men wet themselves, and answered with the brutal honesty only a child can carry. Because nobody listens to me. But everyone listens to you. Somewhere a wine glass slipped from a waiter's hand and shattered, but no one moved to clean it. Garry folded the drawing once, twice, creasing it with the same care he gave million-dollar contracts. 3 weeks earlier, Janet G. Sanders had still believed adults were magic. 3 weeks earlier, Janet G. Sanders had still believed adults were magic. She had skipped down the cracked sidewalk toward Willow Creek Elementary that first Monday in October, yellow hoodie bright against the gray morning, pink backpack bouncing with every step. The air smelled like falling leaves and cafeteria tater tots. She was 7, and the world still made sense. Mom worked hard, but always came home. Teachers were kind if you followed the rules, and the worst thing that could happen was forgetting your library book. Then Connor happened. He was 9, almost 10, and already carried himself like he owned the hallways. His father drove a silver Range Rover and sat on the school board. Connor had decided, for reasons Janet would never understand, that she was the perfect size to push around. It started on the playground. Janet was lining up after recess when Connor shoulder-checked her so hard her sneakers left the ground. She hit the brick wall beside the tetherball courts with a dull thud that knocked the air from her lungs. Her lunchbox flew from her hands, lid popping open, apple rolling into a puddle, sandwich flattening under someone's shoe. Laughter exploded around her like fireworks. She sat there stunned, palms stinging from catching herself, tears already burning the backs of her eyes. Mrs. Hargrove, the 4th grade teacher on duty, glanced over from 20 feet away, adjusted her whistle, and turned back to her conversation with the PE coach. Janet waited for someone to help. No one did. Connor leaned down, breath hot with cinnamon gum. Oops. Watch where you're going, baby. By the time the bell rang, her elbow was bleeding through the sleeve of her hoodie, and the only thing anyone said was, "Hurry up, we're late for math." That afternoon, she told her homeroom teacher, Miss Rivera, while the rest of the class filed out for buses. Connor pushed me really hard, and no one stopped him. Miss Rivera was packing her tote bag, already halfway out the door in her mind. She gave Janet the tired smile adults save for children who interrupt their escape. Janet, sometimes kids play rough. Did you tell him to stop? I couldn't breathe. Well, next time, use your words. Connor's just energetic. I'm sure he didn't mean it. Janet stood there holding her bleeding elbow until Miss Rivera sighed. Come on, your mom's probably waiting. But Mom wasn't waiting. Mom was pulling a double shift at the hospital, and Janet took the late bus home alone. She didn't tell her mother that night. Serena Sanders came through the door at 11:47 p.m., still in scrubs, hair twisted up with a pen, smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. Janet pretended to be asleep. She didn't want to add one more weight to the invisible pile her mom already carried. The next day, Connor knocked her books off her desk during silent reading. The day after that, he accidentally spilled chocolate milk down the back of her hoodie in the lunch line. Each time, teachers looked the other way. Each time, Janet's table at lunch grew emptier. By the end of the first week, even quiet Mia, who used to share fruit snacks, started sitting somewhere else. Being Janet's friend now meant becoming a target. No one wanted that math. Janet learned to make herself small. She started eating lunch in the library, hiding between the mythology section and the encyclopedias no one ever touched. Mrs. Lefkowitz, the librarian, noticed but said nothing. She just left an extra carton of milk on the table some days. At home, the changes crept in like frost. Janet stopped talking about school. When Serena asked how her day was, she answered, "Fine," in a voice that got smaller every time. She started checking the locks 3, 4, 5 times before bed. She asked if they could leave the hallway light on. Serena noticed. Of course she did. She was a nurse. She read bodies the way other people read books. But she was also drowning. Rent was late. The car needed brakes. Her supervisor had cut overtime again. She told herself it was just a phase. Kids go through stuff. Janet would bounce back. Then came the first visible bruise. It was a Thursday. Connor and 2 of his friends cornered Janet behind the portables during recess. One of them held her backpack so she couldn't run. Connor grabbed her wrist to look at the friendship bracelet she'd made with Mia last year before Mia abandoned her, and twisted until something popped. Janet cried out. A 6th grader walking past glanced over, saw who it was, and kept walking. That night, Serena found her daughter sitting on the bathroom floor trying to wrap an ace bandage around her own arm with shaking hands. "Baby, what happened?" Janet's lip trembled. "I fell." Janet Grace Sanders, you look at me. The bruise was already turning purple, perfect fingerprints blooming across pale skin. That was the night Serena made the first call. She kept her voice calm, professional, the way she spoke to difficult doctors. She explained the pattern. She used words like documented incidents and hostile environment. Principal Whitaker listened for 47 seconds before interrupting. "Mrs. Sanders." "It's Miss." "Miss Sanders, children exaggerate. Without witnesses willing to come forward, it's very difficult. I'm looking at fingerprints on my 7-year-old's arm." A pause. Then the tone that made Serena's blood turn to ice, patient, condescending, final. "I'll speak to Connor's parents. In the meantime, perhaps Janet needs to work on her social skills. Some children invite negative attention." Serena hung up, shaking so hard she had to sit on the kitchen floor. She emailed. She left voicemails. She filled out the online bullying report form the district website bragged about. She attached photos of the bruises, timestamps, descriptions. The response came 3 days later from the vice principal. "Thank you for reaching out. We take these matters seriously. However, after reviewing hallway footage, we see no evidence of intentional harm. Janet appears to have tripped. Please encourage her to stay with the group during recess to avoid accidents." There was no hallway footage of behind the portables. Serena knew that. Janet knew that. The school knew that. Janet stopped skipping on the way to school. She started dragging her feet, finding excuses to walk slower. Some mornings, Serena had to physically nudge her out the door. Night terrors began the second week. Janet would wake screaming that someone was in the apartment. Serena would run in to find her daughter sitting bolt upright, eyes wide and unseeing, clutching her pink backpack to her chest like body armor. It took 20, 30, 40 minutes to calm her down. Some nights Serena just brought her into her own bed and held her until dawn, both of them exhausted before the day even started. By the 3rd week, Janet had mastered a new skill, scanning every room for exits. She sat with her back to walls. She flinched when adults raised their voices. She stopped drawing rainbows and started drawing locked doors. Serena took a day off work unpaid and marched into Principal Whitaker's office with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Photos. Emails. Medical notes from the clinic where a coworker had examined Janet's wrist. A timeline printed in neat columns. Whitaker barely glanced at it. "Miss Sanders, I understand you're upset, but Connor's father is a major donor. The new STEM wing. Serena leaned forward. Are you telling me my daughter's safety is for sale? Of course not. He smiled the way politicians do on TV. But these things are complicated. Children lie, parents overreact. If we investigated every claim. She has bruises shaped like fingers. Whitaker closed the folder without opening it. I'll tell you what I can do. I'll move Janet to a different lunch table. Give it a few weeks. She'll adjust. Serena stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. My daughter is not the one who needs to adjust. She stormed out before he could respond. That night, Janet asked, in the smallest voice Serena had ever heard. Mommy, why don't they believe me? Serena had no answer. She just held her daughter until the crying stopped, both of them pretending the tears were Janet's alone. The next morning, Serena received an email from the district office forwarded by Principal Whitaker himself. Subject: Resolution of concern. Case closed. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. After thorough investigation, we have determined there is insufficient evidence to support claims of bullying. We consider this matter resolved and will be closing the file. Please refrain from further unsubstantiated complaints, as repeated filings may be viewed as harassment of school personnel. Serena stared at the screen until the words blurred. Across town, in a restaurant bathed in golden light, a little girl in a yellow hoodie was about to walk through a door no one expected and ask the one man in the city who still believed power could fix what kindness wouldn't. But that was still 6 days away. For now, Janet G. Sanders was learning the first terrible lesson every powerless person eventually learns. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who look away first. It showed up on a Tuesday. Janet first noticed it while she waited at the crosswalk with the other second graders, the ones who now pretended she was invisible. A black sedan, older model, windows tinted so dark they looked wet. It idled across the street from the school gates, engine rumbling low like something alive and hungry. No one got out, no one rolled a window down. It just sat there, exhaust curling into the cold October air. Janet's stomach flipped the way it did when Connor walked past her desk. She told herself it was nothing. Parents waited in cars all the time. But none of them looked like that. Wednesday, it was back. Same spot. Same rumble. This time, she tried to memorize the license plate, the way they taught in the stranger danger assembly nobody took seriously. The numbers blurred together in her head, the harder she stared. Thursday, it followed her 3 blocks before turning off. Not fast, not slow, just keeping pace. Janet walked faster, her pink backpack thumping against her spine with every panicked step. When she glanced over her shoulder, the car was still there, half a block behind, headlights off, even though the sky had gone gray. She didn't tell anyone. Telling hadn't worked before. Friday was the day the voice finally spoke. Janet came out of school alone because of course she did, and the black car was parked directly across from the main doors. Closer than it had ever dared. The passenger window slid down exactly 3 inches. Just enough for a man's voice to slip through, low and calm and terrible. I know which apartment is yours, Janet. The one with the broken blind on the 2nd floor. Her name. He used her name. The world tilted. Janet's legs moved before her brain caught up. She ran. Backpack slamming against her back, sneakers slapping wet pavement, lungs burning by the time she burst through the apartment door and slammed every lock behind her. Serena was already in her scrubs, grabbing her keys for the evening shift. One look at her daughter's face and the keys clattered to the counter. Baby, talk to me. Janet couldn't. The words stuck behind her teeth like broken glass. Serena knelt, pulled her close, felt the frantic rabbit beat of her heart. Janet, breathe. Tell mommy. Between sobs, it spilled out. The car, the man, the voice, the blind they'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. Serena's face went very still. The kind of still that meant a storm was gathering behind her eyes. She made the calls. First the school. Principal Whitaker's secretary put her straight through this time, maybe because Serena's voice shook with something that sounded like murder. A man in a car just threatened my 7-year-old daughter outside your building. I want to know why no one noticed. Whitaker's sigh crackled over the line. Miss Sanders, children have vivid imaginations. He used her name. He knows where we live. I'm sure it was just someone lost, asking directions. We have crossing guards. Your crossing guards were gone by 3:15. I pick her up at 3:30 on my days off, you know that. Another sigh, heavier. I'll mention it to security. In the meantime, perhaps keep Janet home if she's feeling anxious. Serena hung up before she said something that would get her arrested. Next, she called the police. The officer who answered sounded like he was eating chips. Yeah, ma'am, sitting in a car isn't a crime. Did he touch her? Threaten violence? He said he knows where we live. That could mean anything. Could be a family friend playing a prank. He's been parked outside the school for a week. A rustle, maybe the chip bag closing. Without a plate number or a description of the driver, there's nothing we can do. File a report online if you want it documented. Serena filed the report. She attached photos she'd started taking of every bruise, every torn hoodie, every tear-stained face. She wrote the timeline in bullet points that looked like screams on the screen. The automated reply came back in 6 minutes. Thank you for your report. An officer will be in touch if further action is required. No one ever called. The bullying didn't pause for any of it. Monday, Connor and his friends waited by the coat hooks. They grabbed Janet's backpack, unzipped it, and dumped everything into the boys' bathroom toilet: books, folders, the little tin with her emergency quarters. One of them held her phone up high and took a picture while she tried to fish her math workbook out of the swirling water. She walked into class dripping, smelling like bleach. Miss Rivera wrinkled her nose. Janet, we don't have time for drama. Go to the nurse and get a spare shirt. The nurse gave her a stained gym shirt 2 sizes too big and told her to stop crying. Tears weren't hygienic. Tuesday, Connor tripped and elbowed her in the mouth during gym. Her lips split. Blood dripped onto the polished floor. Coach Ramirez handed her a wad of rough paper towels. Walk it off, Sanders. Happens to everybody. It didn't happen to Connor. Wednesday, they cornered her in the stairwell and twisted her arm until she promised, sobbing, to bring $5 tomorrow, or they'd make the car man come faster. Janet didn't have $5. Serena counted change for groceries. That night, Serena took more photos. The split lip. The new fingerprint bruises blooming on her upper arm. The red marks where someone had yanked her ponytail so hard strands came out in her hand. She emailed the school again. Attached everything. CC'd the superintendent, the school board, the local news tip line. The reply from Principal Whitaker personally came at 11:43 p.m. Miss Sanders. We are deeply concerned by these repeated allegations. However, without corroborating witnesses or video evidence, we are unable to take disciplinary action. Perhaps a meeting with our counselor would help Janet process her feelings. Serena threw her phone so hard it cracked the screen. Janet stopped sleeping. She lay rigid under her thin blanket, ears straining for every creak of the building, every car engine on the street below. Some nights she padded to the window and peered through the gap in the blinds, searching the shadows for that familiar black shape. Most nights, she found nothing and hated herself for the tiny flicker of disappointment, because if the car wasn't there, that meant she really might be going crazy, like everyone said. On the nights it was there, she didn't scream. She just curled into a ball and waited for morning, counting heartbeats like sheep. Serena started parking 3 blocks away and walking to get Janet. Even on nights she worked until midnight, she bought pepper sprays she couldn't afford and taught Janet how to dial 911 with shaking thumbs. She lay awake listening to her daughter breathe too fast in the next room and wondered how many shifts she could pick up, how far away they could move, how you outrun a ghost that knows your address. The bruises layered on top of each other now, yellow fading to purple, fresh red blooming over healing green. Serena photographed them all, a mother's desperate archive of proof no one wanted to see. Janet's drawings changed. Where there used to be unicorns and rainbows, now there were only locked doors and giant black boxes with wheels. Sometimes she drew herself in the corner, tiny and alone. Sometimes she didn't draw herself at all. One night, Serena found her asleep on the living room floor, clutching the kitchen knife like a teddy bear. That was the night Serena sat at the table and cried until there was nothing left. 11 days after the voice first spoke, Janet woke at 12:07 a.m. to the low growl of an engine that had become the soundtrack of her nightmares. She crept to the window on silent feet, pulled the blind aside exactly 1 inch. The black car was parked directly beneath the streetlight across from their building. Engine off now, but the driver hadn't left. She could see the faint glow of a cigarette ember behind the tinted glass. He was watching her window. Janet stood frozen, fingers still holding the blind, breath fogging the cold glass. The cigarette ember flared brighter as if the man had taken a long drag just to let her know he saw her seeing him. Then the blind slipped from her numb fingers and fell back into place. She didn't scream. She didn't run to her mother. She just stood there in the dark, 7 years old, and understood something no child ever should. No one was coming to save them. Not the teachers. Not the principal. Not the police. Not even Mommy, who was asleep exhausted in the next room. Janet pressed her forehead against the cool window and whispered the only thing left to say. Please, somebody help. Across the city, in a restaurant that never closed, a man with tattoos creeping above his collar was about to have his world cracked open by a little girl in a yellow hoodie who had run out of every other door. But that was still 3 days away. Tonight, the car waited. And Janet learned how silence can be louder than any scream. Garry J. McLaughlin did not look up when the door of the restaurant opened again. He didn't need to. The silence that fell was different this time, thicker, almost reverent, the way the room went quiet when someone was about to die. Only this time no one was dying. He felt her before he saw her. A small disturbance in the air, the way prey feels the shadow of a hawk. And then she was there, 3 feet from his table, yellow hoodie too bright for the dim light, pink backpack hanging off one shoulder like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The child's eyes were huge, glassy with tears she refused to let fall, and they were looking straight at him. Garry had stared down killers, federal agents, men who would cut their own mother's throat for a better corner. None of them had ever made the room feel this small. He set the pen down. The question left his mouth before he could stop it, low and flat. Why? She unfolded the paper with shaking hands. Bruises on her wrist, adult fingerprints, purple and fresh. The crayon drawing was childish, violent, heartbreaking. Angry stick figures circling a tiny one, a black car with devil eyes, her address scrawled in the corner like a cry for help. Garry took it between 2 fingers as carefully as if it were wired to explode. She told him. Not everything, children never tell everything, but enough. The pushing. The teachers who looked away. The man in the car who knew where she lived. The police who said kids make things up. Then the line that punched straight through 35 years of armor. Because nobody listens to me. But everyone listens to you. He folded the drawing once, twice, slipped it into the inside pocket of his suit right over the heart no one believed he still had, and gave a single nod to his driver waiting by the kitchen door. Take her home, slow, no one follows. The child Janet looked up at him with something dangerously close to trust, and Garry felt the floor tilt under his feet for the first time since he was 9 years old. Hours later, long after the restaurant had emptied and the city outside had gone to its particular brand of midnight quiet, Garry sat alone in the office above the dining room. 1 green banker's lamp. 1 glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The crayon drawing lay open on the leather desk blotter like evidence in a trial he hadn't agreed to prosecute. He stared at it until the lines blurred. His lieutenants came in waves, the way they always did when something smelled like trouble. First was Marco, 6'4", knuckles like gravel. Boss, she's nobody. Kid from the east side, single mom works nights at Mercy General. We got bigger problems than some schoolyard shit. Then Cole, the calm one, the one who'd once been a cop before he realized the money was better on the other side. Gee, this crosses lines. You start playing hero for little girls, people think you're going soft, soft gets you dead. Even Victor, the oldest, the one who'd known Garry when he was still a scrawny kid with a bustedly drunk father and a mother who cried in the bathroom, shook his head. We don't do charity cases, Garry. We don't do clean. This one's got cops, school boards, probably politicians. You dig, you're gonna find people who pay us to look the other way. You really want to burn that bridge for a 7-year-old you met 5 minutes ago? Garry didn't answer any of them. He just sat there, thumb tracing the wobbly purple crayon letters of Janet's address, and let the memories come, the ones he'd buried so deep they usually stayed quiet. He was 8, maybe 9, hiding under the kitchen table while his father used his mother as a punching bag for forgetting to buy the right brand of beer. The old man's voice slurred and huge. You think anyone's coming to save you? Ain't nobody coming. Garry remembered the exact sound of his mother's ribs cracking. He remembered crawling out after his father passed out, pressing his small body against hers on the linoleum, whispering over and over, I'm here, Mama. I'm here, like that could make the blood stop. No one had come then either. Not the neighbors who heard everything through thin walls. Not the cops his mother called twice before she stopped calling. Not the teachers who saw the bruises and asked no questions. He had sworn, even then, that when he grew up, no one would ever make him feel that small again. And he hadn't. He'd built walls out of money and fear and broken bones. He'd become the thing monsters were afraid of. And tonight, a 7-year-old girl in a yellow hoodie had walked straight through every wall like they were made of smoke. Garry stood up so fast the chair rolled back and hit the wall. Get out, he told his lieutenants. They knew better than to argue. When the door closed, he took the drawing to the window and held it up to the streetlight. The black car in the picture looked exactly like the ones his own men drove. The angry stick figures could have been any of the boys he'd once been, before he learned how to hit back harder. He thought of Janet's wrist, those fingerprints. He thought of her voice, small and steady. Everyone listens to you. Something cracked open inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in 25 years. It hurt worse than any bullet he'd ever taken. Garry picked up the phone. "Rico," he said when his driver answered. "The kid Janet Sanders you took home earlier. She get inside safe?" "Yeah, boss." Mom was waiting at the door. Looked like she'd been crying, but the kid hugged her and they went in. Lights went off 10 minutes later. "Good." A pause. "From now on, nobody touches that building. Nobody even breathes on it. Clear. Crystal." He hung up and dialed again. "Marco. I want eyes on the girl. Not close, don't scare her. Just make sure she gets to school and back. Every day." Marco started to protest. "Every day." Then the third call. Cole. Black sedan, tinted windows, been parked outside Willow Creek Elementary last 2 weeks. Find it. Find who's driving, find why. "And the school?" "Start with the boy who put bruises on her. Work up from there." Cole's voice was careful. "We doing this quiet or loud?" "Quiet. For now." Garry hung up and poured the untouched whiskey down the sink. He wouldn't need it tonight. The first report came back before dawn. Cole slid a thin folder across the desk at 4:17 a.m. Connor Hargrove, 9 years old. Father, Richard Hargrove, real estate developer, major donor to Willow Creek Elementary. Sat on the school board. Owned half the commercial properties on the east side, including several that paid protection to a crew Garry had been planning to absorb anyway. There was a photograph. Richard Hargrove shaking hands with Principal Whitaker at last year's gala. Another one, Hargrove leaving a known drop house at 2 a.m. 2 weeks ago. Garry stared at the pictures for a long time. Then he looked at Janet's drawing again, the tiny stick figure alone in the middle, surrounded by monsters wearing smiles. He folded his hands on the desk and spoke to the empty room, voice rough with something that might have been rage or grief or both. No child should have to beg for safety. The words hung in the air like a vow. Outside, the city was still asleep. But something had woken up that would not go back to sleep until every person who had looked away paid for it. And Garry J. McLaughlin, the most dangerous man in 3 states, was about to become the answer to a little girl's prayer. By sunrise the next day, Garry McLaughlin's machine was already moving. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When Garry spoke quietly, people ran. Marco and 2 others picked up the black sedan before it even reached the school that morning. They stayed 4 cars back, swapped vehicles twice, used plates that belonged to dead men. The driver never knew he was being hunted. By noon, Cole slid a photograph across Garry's desk. A grainy still of the man behind the wheel. Mid-30s. Neck tattoos that disappeared under a cheap collar. Gold pinky ring, shaped like a dollar sign. Name's Derek Deuce Moretti, Cole said. Runs with the Hawthorne crew. Low-level extortion, mostly single moms, nurses, waitresses, women who work nights and can't afford to move. They lean on them for $200-300 a week. Call it street insurance. If the women fall behind, the kids start having accidents at school. Garry's jaw flexed once. That was all. Keep going. Cole laid down the next sheet. Deuce reports to a captain named Rico Valdez. Valdez has 2 uniforms on his Christmas list, Officers Harlan and Park, 3rd Precinct. $500 each the first of every month, cash in a Denny's bag. In return, any calls about black cars or threats get marked unfounded before the ink dries. Garry stared at the officers' badge photos until the faces burned into his memory. Proof? Cole smiled the way a wolf smiles. We cloned Deuce's phone while he was buying cigarettes. Texts, bank drops, even a photo of Park taking the envelope last week. It's all time, stamped. Garry nodded once. The school. That part was cleaner, almost too clean. They didn't need to kick in doors. Willow Creek Elementary's IT director earned $48,000 a year and had a gambling problem in Atlantic City. $10,000 in cryptocurrency, and he handed over administrator credentials like they were breath mints. By nightfall, Victor was in the back office with 3 laptops glowing in the dark, pulling ghosts out of deleted folders. They found the footage first. Hallway cameras, playground cameras. Even the ones supposed to cover the portables every file Serena Sanders had begged for had been moved to a hidden partition labeled Old Maint. Someone had clipped out 30-second segments and replaced them with looping empty corridors. But nothing is ever really deleted. Victor recovered it all. Connor Hargrove slamming Janet against the brick wall. Connor twisting her wrist behind the portables. Connor and 2 older boys dumping her backpack into the toilet while a teacher scrolled on her phone 10 feet away. There was sound on some of them. Cry again and we'll have the carman visit mommy at work. Garry watched every second without blinking. Then came the emails. Hundreds of them. A chain starting the first week Serena complained. From Miss Rivera to Principal Whitaker. Kid's a drama queen. Bruises probably from home. You want me to call CPS on a nurse who works doubles? Whitaker's reply. Let's keep this quiet. Richard Hargrove just pledged another $250K for the STEM wing. Tell the mother we're monitoring. Another chain, vice principal to counselor. Sanders girl again. Move her lunch table and close the file. I'm tired of the emails. An internal note from Whitaker to the school board president attached to Serena's formal bullying report with photos of Janet's split lip. Single mom, no husband in the picture, probably looking for a payout. Recommend denial. Hargrove's donation closes next week. Garry read them aloud, voice flat, while Victor recorded everything to an encrypted drive. There was even a group chat teachers, the nurse, 2 board members called, problem parents 24/25. Serena's name came up 27 times, laughing emojis after every dismissed complaint. Someone posted a meme of a woman yelling at a cat labeled, helicopter moms. Garry closed the laptop with deliberate care. Cole waited in the doorway. We can make them disappear, boss. All of them. One night, no bodies, just lessons. Garry didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and looked down at the city, his city glittering like it was innocent. He thought of Janet standing 3 feet away from him, trembling but not running. He thought of the crayon drawings still folded in his pocket. He thought of his mother on that kitchen floor 30 years ago, begging someone, anyone, to make it stop. No, he said finally. We do this clean. Cole frowned. Clean? No blood. No broken knees. Not yet. Garry turned. His eyes were ice, but underneath the ice something burned cold and blue. We give them the one thing they're terrified of, consequences they can't buy their way out of. He laid out the plan like a battle map. Every recovered video date stamped, unedited, copied in high definition. Every email, every text, every bank transfer screenshot. The cloned phone data from Deuce Moretti. The photographs of officers, Harlan and Park taking envelopes. The deposit records showing Richard Hargrove's donations hitting the school's account the same week complaints were buried. Audio of Whitaker laughing on a recorded line, let the kid cry, daddy's money talks louder. Everything triple backed up, encrypted, and packaged like a bomb with a bow. One copy would go to the district attorney's office delivered by a courier no one could trace back to Garry. One copy to every major news outlet in the state, timed for the same morning. One copy to the FBI field office with a highlighted section on interstate extortion. And one copy Garry kept that one. Insurance. He worked through the night and into the next day, reviewing every frame, every word, until the evidence was so airtight a first-year law student could win with it. At 4:12 a.m., he sat alone again, the office lit only by the city glow through the blinds. On the desk in front of him, a plain manila folder, 2 inches thick, labeled only with a child's purple crayon name in Garry's careful adult handwriting. Janet G. Sanders. Inside were the deaths of careers, marriages, reputations, and one very profitable extortion ring. Garry rested his hand on the folder like it was something sacred. He thought of the little girl who had walked into his world and asked the most dangerous man in the city for the simplest thing in the world, to feel safe walking to school. Soon the people who had taught her no one was coming would learn the same lesson. Garry had learned all those years ago. Sometimes monsters do come. They just don't always come for the people who deserve them first. Garry stood, slipped the folder into a locked briefcase, and spoke to the empty room. Tomorrow, he said, the city finds out what happens when you make a child beg. He turned off the light. In the dark, the most feared man in 3 states looked almost gentle. Almost. For 21 days, Garry McLaughlin became a ghost on the east side streets. Every morning at 7:42 a.m., he left the restaurant through the service door, black coat collar turned up, no driver, no bodyguard. He walked the 12 blocks to Willow Creek Elementary the way other men walk to church, slow, deliberate, reverent. He never got closer than half a block. He never let Janet see him. He told himself it was tactical. Eyes on the target, threat assessment. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. He needed to watch her breathe easy again. The first week, she still ran. Head down. Pink backpack clutched to her chest like a shield, sneakers slapping pavement in frantic rhythm. She scanned every parked car, every shadow between buildings. When a city bus hissed at the curb, she flinched so hard she stumbled. Garry felt it in his own body, that flinch. A memory of being small and hunted. He stood beneath the same dying oak every morning, hands in pockets, and counted her steps until she disappeared through the school doors. Then, he waited another 10 minutes just in case the black sedan decided to return. It didn't. Deuce Moretti had received one warning, delivered in person at 3:14 a.m. Behind a shuttered laundromat. Garry hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. One hand on the back of Deuce's neck, pressing his face into the brick wall just hard enough to scrape skin, and a single sentence whispered against his ear. Touch the Sanders girl again, and they'll never find enough of you to bury. The Hawthorne crew got the message. The black car vanished from the city like it had never existed. By the second week, Janet's run had slowed to a hurried walk. Her shoulders stayed high, ready for impact, but she wasn't sprinting anymore. She even paused once at the corner store to look at the candy display of cheap bracelets in the window. Garry watched from across the street and felt something loosen in his chest. Week 3, she began to look up. Not at him, never at him, but at the sky, at passing dogs, at the colored leaves stuck in chain-link fences. One morning she kicked a pile of them, and a tiny laugh escaped her. The sound floated back to Garry on the cold air and lodged somewhere behind his ribs like shrapnel. He started leaving earlier, staying later. Some afternoons he followed the long way home, tracing her route past the bodega, the laundromat, the alley where teenagers smoked weed and pretended not to see her. He memorized every crack in the sidewalk that could trip small feet, every overgrown hedge that could hide a threat. He told no one. Not Cole, not Marco, not even Victor. This wasn't business anymore. This was penance. The school noticed first. A new substitute teacher spotted the tall man in the black coat standing motionless beneath the oak every morning and called the resource officer. The resource officer, a bored retiree who spent most shifts asleep in his cruiser, drove past twice, saw the tattoos creeping above the collar, and decided he suddenly had paperwork downtown. Principal Whitaker received an anonymous email from a concerned parent with a blurry photo attached, a dark figure, half hidden by tree branches, watching the playground. Whitaker stared at the photo for a long time, then deleted it. He knew exactly whose territory Willow Creek sat on. He also knew Richard Hargrove had stopped returning his calls. Connor Hargrove felt the change too. The boy who once ruled recess like a petty tyrant started looking over his shoulder. He stopped shoving kids on the slides. He sat alone at lunch, picking at his food, eyes darting to the windows. One day, he cornered Janet by the swings and hissed, "Tell your new boyfriend to back off, or my dad will." Janet looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, didn't cry. "I don't have a boyfriend," she said quietly. "But if I did, I bet he'd be scarier than your dad." Connor backed away so fast he tripped over a jump rope. That afternoon, Janet walked home without checking behind her once. Garry almost smiled. Then came the morning, everything shifted. It was drizzling, the kind of cold November rain that soaks through hoodies in minutes. Janet came around the corner at 7:51, slower than usual, plastic raincoat flapping open. She stopped beneath the traffic light to tie her shoe. Garry stood in his usual spot, coat collar up, rain beating on his lashes. She finished the knot, stood up, and looked straight across the street. Right at him. For a heartbeat, the city noise disappeared. Just a little girl in yellow and pink, and a man who had killed with these hands, staring at each other through gray rain. Janet's mouth formed a small O of surprise. Then, she smiled, the first real smile Garry had ever seen on her face, and lifted one small hand in a shy wave. Garry felt the ground drop out from under him. He hadn't been prepared for warmth. Not directed at him. Not ever. His body moved before his mind caught up. A single, slow nod, barely perceptible. But Janet's whole face lit up like sunrise. She waved again, bigger this time, then turned and skipped, actually skipped the rest of the way to school. Garry stood in the rain long after she disappeared, water dripping from his hair, feeling something crack and flood inside him that he didn't have a name for. That night, he sat in the office above the restaurant with the briefcase of evidence open on the desk. Videos, emails, bank records, deleted emails, everything ready. He had planned to wait. Let the pressure build, let the city stew in its own rot a while longer. But Janet's wave kept replaying behind his eyes. Small fingers against gray sky. Trust he hadn't earned. He closed the briefcase. Tomorrow, he told the empty air. Tomorrow I will walk her the whole way. He stood at the window and watched the city lights smear across wet glass. Somewhere out there a little girl was sleeping without nightmares for the first night in months. And, somewhere inside Garry McLaughlin, the man who had built an empire on fear, was learning a new kind of power. The kind that shows up in broad daylight. The kind that holds a child's hand in front of the entire world and dares anyone to say a word. Tomorrow, the school will learn what happens when silence breaks. Tomorrow, the bully, the principal, the corrupt cops, the extortion ring, every person who had taught Janet that the world didn't care would look up and see the most dangerous man in the city standing on their doorstep, holding a 7-year-old's hand. Garry turned off the lamp. In the dark, he spoke to the crayon drawing still in his pocket. Time to come out of the shadows, kid. Tomorrow, the silent guardian would step into the light. And the city would never be the same. The morning of the 19th of November 2025 started like any other at Willow Creek Elementary. Parents clustered near the front doors in expensive coats and cheap gossip, steam rising from paper coffee cups. Kids shrieked across the blacktop, sneakers scuffing through the last of the fallen leaves. The crossing guard blew her whistle with bored rhythm. Someone's SUV blasted pop music while a mom wrestled a stroller out of the back. No one noticed the black town car that pulled up to the curb at exactly 8:07 a.m. No one noticed the driver get out and open the rear door. No one noticed until the screaming started, except it wasn't screaming. It was the sudden, absolute absence of sound. Like someone had hit mute on the entire world. Garry J. McLaughlin stepped onto the sidewalk in a charcoal overcoat that cost more than most teachers made in a month. The tattoos on his neck caught the weak winter sun like black fire. His shoes were silent on the concrete. And holding his left hand, tiny fingers wrapped around two of his, swinging slightly with every step, was Janet G. Sanders in her yellow hoodie and pink backpack. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was smiling. They walked up the main path together, past the flagpole, past the painted hopscotch grid, past the engraved stone that read, "Building Tomorrow's Leaders Today." Gary's stride was unhurried, almost gentle, matched perfectly to the length of a 7-year-old's legs. Conversations died mid-word. A mother's latte slipped from her hand and splattered across the pavement. A father's phone tumbled from his fingers and clattered against the curb. The crossing guard's whistle fell from her lips and dangled uselessly. Every eye followed the impossible pair. Janet's chin was high. For the first time in months, she looked like a child walking to school instead of a soldier marching into battle. Gary's expression was calm, almost serene, but the air around him seemed to bend, like heat above asphalt. Halfway up the walk, Connor Hargrove stepped out from behind a pillar where he'd been shoving a first grader's backpack into a trash can. He saw Janet. Then he saw who was holding her hand. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. The backpack fell from his hands and spilled across the ground. Connor took one involuntary step backward and tripped over his own feet. No one laughed. Teachers appeared in doorways and froze. Miss Rivera, clutching a stack of worksheets, turned white as copy paper. Coach Ramirez dropped his coffee and didn't even notice the stain spreading across his whistle lanyard. The school nurse, halfway through scolding a kindergartner for fake tears, let the child go and backed away until she hit the brick wall. Principal Whitaker burst through the main doors in his usual Navy suit, ready to glad hand donors and pretend everything was fine. He saw Garry McLaughlin walking toward him holding Janet Sanders' hand, and the smile on his face died like a switch had been flipped. He tried to retreat. 2 steps back, 3, but the crowd had closed behind him. Parents parted like water, forming an accidental corridor that led straight from the street to the front doors. Whitaker bumped into the resource officer, who suddenly discovered something fascinating on his shoes. Garry and Janet stopped exactly 5 feet from the principal. The entire schoolyard held its breath. Janet squeezed Gary's hand once. He glanced down at her. She gave the smallest nod. Garry reached inside his coat with his free hand and withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. The kind of wax that looked like blood under the morning light. He held it out. Whitaker didn't move. Gary's voice was quiet, almost kind. "Take it." Whitaker's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. He finally clutched the envelope to his chest like it might explode. Inside were flash drive with every recovered second of surveillance footage. Connor slamming Janet into walls, twisting arms, dumping belongings in toilet state, stamped, unedited. Printed email chains, teachers mocking Serena's pleas, Whitaker burying complaints for donations. Screenshots of the secret problem parents chat with laughing emojis next to photos of Janet's bruises. Bank records showing Richard Hargrove's gifts landing the same week reports vanished. Cloned phone data proving the Hawthorne Crew's extortion ring and the 2 3rd precinct officers on payroll. A single white business card from the city's most expensive civil rights attorney with a handwritten note on the back. Available pro bono for the Sanders family. And at the very bottom, on heavy cream stock in Gary's own handwriting. Protect her now. Whitaker's eyes scanned the top page, and his knees actually buckled. He caught himself on the railing. Garry leaned in, just enough for only Whitaker to hear. You had chances. You chose money, now you choose survival. Then, louder, so the entire crowd could hear, calm and clear. Janet Sanders walks these halls safe from today forward. Anyone who touches her, looks at her wrong, or even thinks about it, answers to me. Personally. A visible ripple went through the crowd. Some parents grabbed their kids and started backing toward their cars. Others pulled out phones and started recording, hands trembling. Garry ignored them all. He crouched down to Janet's level, coat pooling around him like wings. You good, kid? Janet looked up at him with those huge brown eyes that had once been full of terror and were now full of something fiercer. I'm good, she whispered. Then, in front of the entire school, she wrapped her small arms around his neck and hugged him. Garry froze for half a heartbeat, every muscle locked. Then he closed his eyes and hugged her back, one large hand cradling the back of her head like she was made of glass. When he stood, his face was unreadable again, but his voice carried a new note, something ancient and unbreakable. Anyone makes her cry again, he said to the silent crowd, I'll know. He turned to leave. Janet tugged his sleeve. Garry looked down. She rose on tiptoes and kissed his cheek, quick and shy. Thank you, Mr. Garry. The most dangerous man in the city looked suddenly, dangerously close to breaking. He nodded once, throat working, then let go of her hand. Janet walked through the front doors alone, head high, backpack bouncing with every confident step. No one stopped her. No one dared breathe until she disappeared. Only then did the spell break. Phones came out in a wave. Videos. Photos. Whispers turning to shouts. Whitaker stumbled backward into the school, envelope clutched to his chest, face gray. He pushed through the office doors, slammed them shut, and fumbled for his phone with shaking fingers. Emergency board meeting, he croaked to the superintendent's voicemail. Right now. Code red, get Hargrove, get lawyers. Get, oh God. He looked down at the envelope in his hands like it was ticking. Outside, Garry McLaughlin walked back down the path he'd come. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. And the city had finally learned what happens when fear decides to protect something innocent. Inside the school, Janet Sanders hung her pink backpack on the hook with her name on it, sat at her desk, and opened her reading book. For the first time in months, her hands didn't shake. Across the city, sirens would soon start wailing. But that was later. For now, the school stayed silent. Perfectly silent. At 9:47 a.m., on the 19th of November 2025, a motorcycle courier in an unmarked black helmet walked into the lobby of the district attorney's building. No logos, no company name, just a plain manila envelope the size of a phone book and a fake name on the sign-in sheet. He left without a word. By 10:12 a.m., the envelope was on District Attorney Elena Vasquez's desk, red wax seal already broken by security. She thought it was another crank tip until she saw the first photograph, 2 uniformed officers taking cash in a Denny's parking lot, time, stamped, crystal clear. By 10:31 a.m., she was on a conference call with the Chief of Police, the State Attorney General's office, and the FBI. By 11:05 a.m., the city stopped pretending it was clean. Raid teams hit 12 locations at once. The Hawthorne Crew's main stash house, on 9th and Mercer, was breached so fast the lookout didn't have time to flush the cash. 23 arrests in the first hour. Deuce Moretti was dragged out in handcuffs, still wearing the same $ pinky ring he'd flashed at Janet from the black car. He started screaming about lawyers until someone showed him the cloned phone records. Then he started crying. The black sedan was towed from an impound lot in the South End before noon, trunk full of burner phones and a notebook with every target's name, address, and weekly payment. Janet G. Sanders was on page 7, starred in red ink. Officers Harlan and Park were pulled from patrol before their lunch break. Suspended without pay, escorted out of the 3rd precinct in front of rolling news cameras. Park tried to hide his face with his jacket. Harlan just stared straight ahead, already calculating how many years he was looking at. Richard Hargrove was arrested at his country club at 12:47 p.m., mid-swing on the 9th hole. Federal marshals in windbreakers waited while he finished his putt because even the law has a sense of theater. His phone started blowing up before the cuffs clicked. Every donation he'd ever made to the school, every consulting fee to Principal Whitaker, every offshore account was already frozen. By 2 p.m., the news helicopters were circling. Every local station led with the same headline crawling across the bottom of the screen. Massive corruption scandal rocks. City. School cover-up, extortion ring, dirty cops all linked. They had the videos. Someone Garry had made sure of that. The raw hallway footage of Connor Hargrove slamming a 7-year-old into brick walls played on loop, pixelated just enough for broadcast. The emails followed. The laughing emojis next to a child's bruises. The memo calling Serena Sanders a problem parent looking for a payout. The city watched in collective horror. Social media detonated. Number. Protect Janet trended nationwide within an hour. Old videos from the school drop-off line parents filming the moment Garry McLaughlin walked Janet through the gates racked up tens of millions of views. The clip of her hugging him at the doors played on repeat, slowed down, set to music, memed into oblivion. By 3:15 p.m., the school board was in full meltdown. Emergency session in the administration building, doors locked, blinds drawn. Principal Whitaker sat at the long table, looking like a man attending his own autopsy. Board members screamed at each other across polished wood. Someone leaked the agenda to the press. Item 1. Immediate resignation of Dennis Whitaker. Item 2. Suspension of all donations tied to Richard Hargrove. Item 3. How the hell do we survive tomorrow? Whitaker's phone buzzed nonstop on the table. He finally answered the speaker, thinking it was his lawyer. It was Serena Sanders. He tried the old tone, condescending, soothing. Miss Sanders, this is hardly the time. You had months, Serena said. Her voice was quiet, steady, lethal. You had photos. You had emails. You had my baby's blood on her clothes, and you called it drama. Now the whole world knows what you are. Click. The room went quieter than the playground had that morning. By 4 p.m., Serena's phone started ringing off the hook. The superintendent. The mayor's office. The State Department of Education. Every apology began the same way. We're deeply committed to student safety. She let every call go to voicemail. At 6 p.m., the FBI held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Agent in charge read from a prepared statement. This investigation was made possible by an anonymous citizen who provided irrefutable evidence of systemic corruption. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Who is the source? Was this connected to organized crime? Any comment on viral videos showing a known mob figure escorting a child to school? The agent smiled the way only federal agents smile. No comment on ongoing investigations. But the city already knew. They knew because the evidence was too perfect, too complete, too surgical. Only one man in the city could pull every thread at once and make the whole rotten tapestry unravel in a single day. By nightfall, Garry McLaughlin was trending higher than the scandal itself. Old mugshots next to new screenshots of him holding Janet's hand. Side-by-side photos. The most feared face in the underworld and the soft way he'd look down at a 7-year-old who wasn't afraid of him anymore. Memes exploded. Garry as Batman, as John Wick, as an avenging angel with neck tattoos. Someone photoshopped a halo over his head and wings made of shadows. The news anchors couldn't say his name on air. Too many lawsuits in the past, but they didn't need to. They just showed the footage again and again, the silent walk up the school path, the envelope, the hug, the nod that ended careers. In his office above the restaurant, Garry watched it all on muted televisions. Cole poured 2 fingers of whiskey and slid one across the desk. You broke the city today, boss. Garry didn't touch the glass. He was looking at a single photograph on his phone taken by a parent, zoomed in, grainy but unmistakable. Janet waving at him from across the street weeks ago, that first shy smile through the rain. He closed the phone. Let them talk, he said. Victor stood by the window, watching the news choppers circle downtown like vultures. They're calling you a hero. Gary's laugh was soft, almost sad. I'm not the hero. He looked at the crayon drawing on the desk, the one Janet had given him that first night. The tiny stick figure surrounded by monsters, and off to the side one tall shadow with no face. That's her, he said. She walked into the dark and asked for help when no one else would. I just answered. Cole shook his head. You answered with a nuclear bomb. Good. Silence settled over the room, heavy and satisfied. Below them, the city burned with scandal and sirens and the kind of justice people had stopped believing in. Above them, in a cramped apartment on the east side, Janet Sanders slept without nightmares for the first time in months. Her mother sat beside the bed, holding a small silver guardian angel charm that had arrived in an unmarked box that afternoon, no note needed. And somewhere in the shadows between the two, Garry McLaughlin stood at the window and watched the lights of a city that finally understood. Some monsters don't come to hurt you. Some monsters come when you call. And when a child brave enough to ask gets answered, empires fall. The racket was dead. The corrupt were in cages. The little girl was safe. And the most dangerous man in the city had discovered that protecting one innocent life could feel a lot like redemption. Even if no one ever said thank you. Especially then. The 12th of December, 2025. The first real snow of the season drifted down like slow forgiveness. Janet G. Sanders stepped out of the apartment building at 7:49 a.m., holding her mother's hand. No hurried walk, no scanning shadows, no clutching the pink backpack straps like lifelines. She wore the same yellow hoodie, but it was clean now, sleeves pushed up because she wasn't cold anymore. Not on the inside. Serena walked beside her, taller than she'd been in months, shoulders back, eyes clear. She still worked double shifts, but the exhaustion in her face had shifted into something fierce and grateful. They talked about small things, whether hot chocolate counted as breakfast, if the classroom hamster had babies yet, whether unicorns would like snow. Janet laughed at her own joke. The sound floated up between the buildings and hung in the air like bells. Half a block behind them, on the opposite sidewalk, a tall figure in a long black coat kept pace. He stayed in the blind spot of parked cars and bare trees, the way he had every morning for the last 3 weeks since the world flipped upside down. Only now he didn't need to hide. Janet knew he was there. She always knew. At the corner of Mercer and 14th, she stopped, turned, and looked straight across the street. Garry stood beneath the awning of the closed bodega, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. No bodyguards, no town car idling. Just him, hands in pockets, watching her the way a man watches something he's afraid will vanish if he blinks. Janet smiled, the big, open smile she'd lost for so long and found again the morning he walked her through the school gates. She lifted her mittened hand and waved, slow and deliberate, fingers spread wide like she was trying to catch the snow and send it to him. Gary's throat worked. For a moment the mask slipped, and the city saw the man underneath. Tired, older, stunned by gentleness. He raised one hand, just once, the smallest acknowledgement a dangerous man could allow himself in daylight. Janet's grin widened. She bounced on her toes, waved again, then turned back to her mother. Serena glanced over, met Gary's eyes for the first time, and the look that passed between them held everything words would only ruin. Serena's lips trembled. She pressed a kiss to the top of Janet's head and they kept walking. Garry stayed beneath the awning until the yellow hoodie disappeared around the corner. Until the sound of Janet's boots crunching snow faded into the morning traffic. Until the street felt empty in a way it never had before. Then he turned and walked the other way, coat collar up against a cold that had nothing to do with winter. That evening, the snow turned heavier, soft and silent, blanketing the cracked sidewalks and rusted fire escapes. Serena came home from her shift just after 7, arms full of grocery bags and a tired Joy. Janet was already in pajamas, curled on the couch with Coco and the TV flickering, some Christmas cartoon neither of them was really watching. There was a small box on the welcome mat. Deep midnight blue velvet, no bigger than a deck of cards, tied with a thin silver ribbon. No tag. No footprints leading away, already half filled by fresh snow. Serena's heart stuttered. She knew, even before she picked it up, whose hand had placed it there. Inside, nestled on white satin, lay a silver charm. A guardian angel no longer than a dime, wings spread, face serene. The craftsmanship was old world, heavy, the kind of thing that cost more than sentiment and less than showing off. On the back, tiny engraved words only a child would need. I see you. Beneath the charm, folded once, a single sheet of thick cream paper. The handwriting was angular, careful, the script of a man who rarely wrote anything that wasn't a threat or a contract. You walk safely now. That's all that mattered. G. Serena's knees gave out right there in the doorway. She sank to the floor, snow melting around her boots, and cried the way people cry when the danger is finally over and the body finally believes it. Quiet, shaking sobs that had been locked inside for months. Janet patted over in sock feet, Coco forgotten. Mommy? Serena pulled her daughter into her lap, buried her face in the yellow hoodie that still smelled like little girl and snow and safety. It's okay, baby, she whispered, voice cracking. It's okay, we're okay. Janet peeked into the open box. Her small fingers lifted the angel charm into the lamplight. The silver caught the glow and threw tiny rainbows across the walls. It's from Mr. Garry, she said, not a question. Serena could only nod. Janet studied the angel for a long time, thumb tracing the wings. Then she looked up at her mother with eyes suddenly far too old for 7. He's sad, isn't he? Serena wiped her face. Why do you say that? Because he thinks he still has to be alone. Janet closed her fist gently around the charm. But he doesn't. She slipped the silver angel onto the braided cord she wore around her neck, the one that used to hold only a plastic unicorn, and tucked it under her pajama top, right over her heart. Outside, the snow kept falling. Across the city, in the quiet above the restaurant that never closed, Garry stood at the same window he'd stood at for weeks. The televisions were off. The city was quiet for once, sirens finally sleeping. He held the crayon drawing in his hands, the one Janet had given him that first night. The angry stick figures were faded now, handled too many times. But in the corner, in fresh purple crayon Janet had added during art class last week, there was a new figure. Tall, dark coat, holding a small yellow square by the hand. Underneath, in wobbly, careful letters. "Thank you for walking with me." Garry traced the words with one careful finger. He thought of the wave that morning, the smile that had felt like absolution. He thought of a little girl who had looked monsters in the eye and chosen anyway. He thought of his mother on the kitchen floor all those years ago, and how no one had come. Someone knocked softly, Cole with the night reports. Garry didn't turn. "Leave it on the desk," he said. Cole hesitated. "You good, boss?" Garry was quiet for so long, Cole thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost too low to hear, she waved. Cole waited. Garry folded the drawing once more and slipped it back into his pocket, over his heart where it had lived for weeks. "Tomorrow," he said, "tell the drivers no one tails the Sanders building anymore." Cole's eyebrows rose. "We pulling protection?" "No." Garry finally turned. Snow light from the window caught the edge of his face, softening the scar, the ink, the years of violence. "She doesn't need shadows now. She needs daylight." Cole nodded, understanding something deeper than orders. He left quietly. Garry stayed at the window until the city lights blurred. Somewhere in the snow-muffled night, a little girl slept clutching a silver angel, dreaming of unicorns who weren't afraid of the dark. Her mother slept beside her, finally believing tomorrow would come gently. And Garry McLaughlin, the man the city both feared and owed everything, walked down the back stairs alone, coat unbuttoned against the cold he no longer felt, and stepped into the falling snow. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, 2 lives had been rewritten by one act of impossible courage. Ahead of him, the night was wide and quiet and, for the first time in decades, not entirely his own. Somewhere above, a guardian angel watched over a sleeping child. And, somewhere else, a monster discovered that some chains are broken not by violence, but by a small hand trusting yours in front of the entire world. The snow kept falling, soft and forgiving. And 3 destinies, braided together by a crayon drawing and a velvet box, settled into something that felt a lot like peace.